Okay guys, so for today's lesson we're going to be focusing on the differences and similarities between belief systems and ideologies. Before we could even start to look at Islam, we need to have a basis understanding of what belief systems are and how they operate and how they compare to ideologies. So firstly, belief systems, before we can understand what that is, we need to understand the basis of a belief system, and that is beliefs. So beliefs are defined as anything someone holds to be true, either with or without evidence. So an example of this could be your belief that your parents are the best parents in the world. You might have some evidence to suggest this because they've done a good job of raising you, but whether or not you can compare them to other people, you don't necessarily have evidence for. So that belief comes from somewhat of experience, but also from just your kind of gut feeling about how you feel about the situation. So beliefs can sometimes be based on evidence, but don't necessarily always have to be. Belief systems, also beliefs operate on all levels, so micro, meso, macro. And the way in which belief systems are structured is kind of like on a whole community as the meso or macro level. So we can see this through like the use of churches, government supporting of churches, so like giving tax breaks. Also the Pope exists on a macro level, and so belief systems are structured in kind of all of those levels. Also, the belief system encompasses values, customs, and practices, ultimately creating a culture of beliefs and practices. So we know belief systems as religions, essentially. They don't necessarily have to be religions, but they're usually understood as religions. So Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism as just some examples of belief systems that exist currently in the world. Belief systems for devout adherents define who they are, how they live, what sorts of activities they take on, who they marry, and what they will fight and perhaps die for. So here is an example of how a belief system is. This image here to the left is an example of how belief systems will shape your everyday customs, and so does the one beneath. You know, different praying practices, different wedding practices, what you'll wear to your wedding, maybe even potentially the person you'll marry, how many kids you'll have, what you'll do with those kids when you raise them, whether or not they'll be circumcised, how you'll dress them. All of those things kind of are underpinned by our belief systems, especially for those who are particularly devout. For those that adhere to a belief system but aren't necessarily devout, obviously will have limited influences or won't have the same influences as those that are very strongly devout adherents of their belief system. Oh, and just as a heads up, guys, I'm going to use the word adherents a lot. That refers to followers of a belief. So yeah, as I said, this is not all equally true for all adherents within any belief system, and as I said, it depends on how much they accept their belief system and how much it catches their identity. So for those who truly have faith in their belief system, who are strong adherents and who subscribe to many of the values and beliefs of that belief system, there can be little room for negotiation, and this is where conflict can begin. So for a Jewish man to marry a Hindu woman, the practices around that marriage for those two devout people, that would be very difficult for them to have their religious weddings, as they're very different and they're subscribed to very different practices and traditions, and therefore could lead to conflict not only between the potential Jewish husband and Hindu wife, but also their family members who would also be quite devout. So the ideologies, however, are a little bit different to belief systems. So ideologies, like belief systems, so similarly, can and do function at all three levels as well, so micro, meso, macro. And they can be anything from strong semi-organized belief systems to something closer to a point of view or preference. So a massive difference between ideologies and belief systems is that ideologies have sometimes very limited structure and organization, whereas belief systems tend to be well organized. The term ideology derives from the same word that gives us idea. So what what the basis of most belief systems are is kind of a belief, a religious belief, or a religious understanding of the world. Ideologies usually come from an idea of the world, or how you think kind of things should be run. Examples of ideologies are humanism, environmentalism, Confucianism, and feminism. These again are just some examples, but they're ones that you might be a little bit more familiar with. And feminism especially is one we're going to kind of look at a little bit more closely in terms of understanding ideologies. Ideologies can be positive or negative as well. We don't usually think of ideologies as being negative. I guess fascism is an example of an ideology that could potentially be negative. To some extent, capitalism is can be somewhat of a negative ideology as well. So I've alluded to some of the similarities and some of the differences already between ideologies and belief systems, but we're going to look at a little bit more. So it's not easy to define exactly where ideology ends and belief systems begin, and because of that you can see some similarities as well as some strong differences between the two. One clear difference though is seen in the level of organisation. Ideologies tend not to have a centralised text, clear hierarchical power structures, so for example priests, the Pope, those kinds of things. Ideologies tend not to have that, and they do not always have a clearly defined meeting place. So an ideology like feminism, there's no clear leader. You don't have a one person or even a group of people to turn to. It's kind of like a individual based understanding of the ideology, and also because of that there's no centralized text. So unlike the Bible or the Quran, there's no one text that feminists will read. In fact, some feminists don't read any texts. They just kind of base it off their interactions with individuals, which is not dissimilar to some people that adhere to belief systems, even like Muslims, as we'll come to see and know about already through Afghanistan. Not all of them have read the Quran. So just because there is a text doesn't mean that it's always necessarily read, although the difference between belief systems and ideologies is that for belief systems there is clear texts, whereas for ideologies there's no real prescribed text for the ideology. And as I said, there's no defined clear meeting place. So unlike churches or mosques or Sikh temples, there's no clear meeting places for things like, for ideologies like environmentalists, for humanists, for feminists. There's no clear turning point for them to go to. However, one of the clear similarities between both ideologies and belief systems is their influences that they have on their adherents as well as the world. So both belief systems and ideologies tend to produce worldviews, and this is a perspective or take on the world brought about by a set of beliefs or ideologies. This is kind of this cartoon is kind of an example of that to some extent. This is representative of potentially how environmentalists see the world, that capitalists and big business are more concerned with making money than when protecting and caring about the environment. And so I would say that, yeah, this cartoon is kind of a visual representation of a worldview of an environmentalist. So, for example, Christians, Jewish and Muslim adherents or individuals may believe that their religion is the truest one of all, and that is that that's the one that everyone should follow. So all Muslims believe that their religion is the correct one and everyone should be following it, and all Christians believe that and think that everybody should be following it, and so on and so forth. So that's one big similarity between ideologies and belief systems, is that they shape and underpin the way we understand and see the world, so our perspective or take on the world. Okay guys, so that was just a quick overview of similarities and differences between belief systems and ideologies and what they are. So please make sure that you record down those differences as well as writing your own understanding of what you think a worldview is.